I want to welcome you all here to the American Bar Association, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Meredith Linsky. I'm the director of the Commission on Immigration, and I'm thrilled to have this number of people here today. I know that we're all concerned about the children that are coming into the country who don't have representation, and adding capacity and adding additional pro bono lawyers is our goal today. So thank you for joining us. Over the summer, many of us were reading the media reports about the increasing numbers of unaccompanied children and families entering the U.S. at the southwest border. Between October 1st, 2013 and August 31st, 2014, a total of 66,127 unaccompanied children were apprehended at the southwest border. Most of those children were apprehended in the Rio Grande Valley. That number is an 88% increase over the entire previous fiscal year, where 35,000 children entered. As little as 3 years ago, there were about 6,000 or 7,000 unaccompanied children entering each year. So the numbers certainly have increased dramatically, although since in August and September, the numbers have decreased somewhat. And the reasons for that are unclear, but regardless, all of the children that have entered the country and been reunified with family members are in removal proceedings. They have to go to immigration court, and they have to defend themselves in an adversarial system before an immigration judge opposed by a trained government attorney. And the government does not provide them with attorneys. So we're here to respond to this need and to train ourselves in how to represent these children. Also, the administration has definitely and significantly prioritized these cases, and all of the children and families who entered since May 2014 are expedited on the immigration court dockets. So that means if the children, or when the children are released from detention, they join family members all over the country, but mainly in cities like Houston, Dallas, the DC area, Los Angeles, New York, Miami. Once they arrive, they have their first hearing within 21 days. And that can be very confusing, very disorienting for a family who's still figuring out, what their responsibilities are, how to get around, how to get to an immigration court. The majority of them show up without attorneys. And so there is an enormous need for representation at those dockets. Some of the local American Immigration Lawyers Associations have organized responses and send lawyers on a daily basis to these dockets to help children and to at least appear as friend of the court, which has been accepted by the immigration court system. We all know that people are much more likely to win immigration relief if they are represented and if they're not detained. There have been several studies, including a study by Judge Robert Katzman in New York, that talk about these percentages. And recently, there was a study through the TRAC, Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse at Syracuse University, talking about children who have representation are 47% likely, or 47% of the children who are represented were successful in immigration court and were able to remain in the United States and gain relief. On the other hand, children who are unrepresented, only 10% were able to gain relief. And so that's a stark difference, and certainly having an attorney, even if it's an attorney that's never done anything in immigration law before, is extremely, extremely important. I have a few slides here to go over some of the different statistics. For example, the children that came in this fiscal year that's just ended, 24% came from El Salvador, 25% from Guatemala, 28% from Honduras, and 23% from Mexico. I'll just mention briefly that children from Mexico, from contiguous countries, do not enjoy the same rights and privileges as children from non-contiguous countries. And children from Mexico are usually promptly returned to Mexico without any in-depth screenings or without any right to go before an immigration judge. The Border Patrol officer is supposed to screen these children as to whether they're a victim of trafficking or could be a victim of human trafficking, whether they fear persecution, or whether they're willing and able to return voluntarily to Mexico. But in practice, the vast majority of Mexican children are promptly returned to their country. Here's a picture of Central America. I think we've all heard the term that the Northern Triangle, the countries of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador are considered part of the Northern Triangle of Central America. And you'll see that Hondurans and Salvadorans have to pass through Guatemala before they get to Mexico into the US. Guatemalan children go straight through Mexico. And like I mentioned earlier, the numbers have significantly decreased. That may be because of weather, because it's hotter. It probably also has something to do with the fact that there's been more enforcement in Mexico against Central American children passing through. We use the term unaccompanied minor or unaccompanied child very frequently, but what is the definition? How is it defined? It was defined under the Homeland Security Act of 2002, and it's someone with no lawful immigration status in the US, someone who's not attained 18 years of age, so under 18, and who has no parent or legal guardian in the US, or no parent or legal guardian in the US available to provide care and physical custody. In the majority of these cases, I'd say probably 50% of the recent entrants of the children have at least one parent in the United States. But when they're apprehended, they're not with their parent. When they're apprehended, they may be with other family members, with friends, with a smuggler, or a smuggler may have more likely dropped them off somewhere on the southern border and taken off. So these kids are not with their parents, and they are deemed to be unaccompanied children in the vast majority of circumstances, even though they may have a parent in Houston or LA or New York. What are the causes of the influx? I think for 2 years, many of the meetings that I attended, the main question was why? Why now? Why this increase? What's the difference? Because truthfully, ever since I remember, and I went to the southern border in Texas in 1989, there have been unaccompanied children detained. It's just that the numbers have increased so significantly. Some of the push factors are obvious. They're violence. I think we've all heard about the gangs, and also the drug cartels, the international criminal organizations, have moved into Central America. I don't know that they've been completely pushed out of Mexico, but they've certainly found a new foothold in Central America. And also domestic violence. Many of the children that we end up representing, and when I say we, I mean an ABA project in Texas. I should have mentioned this earlier, I'm sorry. The ABA has sponsored a pro bono project on the border in Texas for the last 25 years. It's called ProBar. It was started in 1989, and it's managed by the Commission on Immigration. And so we have 40 staff members on the Texas border representing many of these children, and we hear many of the stories related to the violence by gangs, by drug cartels, and also domestic violence within the family. Certainly poverty is a push factor. We see this maybe most severely with the indigenous Mayan children, children from many of the highland communities that are extremely, extremely poor, and these children are often coming to support their families. And of course, insecurity, impunity, and corruption that is pervasive throughout Central America. The pull factors are, of course, employment, the ability to reunify with family that are already in the United States, and for education. Many of the children that we meet, like I said, have family members who've been living in the United States, possibly parents that they've been separated from for 5 or 10 years. And so their greatest desire is to live with their parent again, like we would all feel if we were separated from our child for long periods. I recently heard a presentation by a man named Jose Guadalupe Ruelas, who's the director of Casa Alianza in Honduras. He was giving some statistics about the changes in indicators of violence in Central America. And he mentioned that there are 3,700,000 children in Honduras. 1 million are not in school. 8,000 sleep on the streets each night in major cities of San Pedro Sula and Tegucigalpa. 25,000 of these children have tried to leave Honduras this year. 62% of the population live in poverty on less than $1 a day. And these indicators of violence include an average of an increase in the number of children being killed each month. In 2009, the average was 43 a month in Honduras, and today it's 88 per month. So it's very clear, to me and to many others that the incidence of violence has increased significantly over the past few years, and that is certainly one of the major factors causing the immigration and the influx. I'm not going to go through this because we have to move along, but in your PowerPoint presentation, you'll see some indicators, economic and social indicators. For example, the GDP per capita in Honduras is very low, $2,291 per capita versus $53,143 in the US. Honduras has perhaps the highest intentional homicide rate in the world, with 92 homicides per 100,000 people. In the US, it's 5. And in the city of San Pedro Sula, it's actually even higher. It's 173. Honduras has a population of 8 million people and was affected terribly by Hurricane Mitch in 1998 and a coup in 2009. El Salvador is another of the 3 Central American countries. There are many, many Salvadorans in the United States, and they've been here for a very long time. Many of them benefit from having temporary protected status, but those are people who have been in the US for long periods. I know you can take a look at this yourself. I'm going to try to keep moving here. And of course, Guatemala is the 3rd country. The GDP is $3,478 per capita. Poverty rate is 53.7%. And in Guatemala, there are a significant number of indigenous people. I think it's 22 different languages. 40% of the population at least is indigenous. And we are seeing a lot of these children come to the US. They may not speak any Spanish, or they may have learned Spanish on the trip or while they're in the shelters. And we are required, and of course, to speak with them in their native languages and find interpreters, which is not always easy for some of these more remote languages. What happens when a child is apprehended at the border? I think that everyone has seen the images of dozens of children in these cells held by Border Patrol, Customs and Border Protection. When I'm going to call them Border Patrol arrests a child, they bring them to a processing station. Those processing stations are often referred to as heleras, freezers, because of the very, very cold temperatures. They're literally cells. Children are behind bars. There's no beds. It's cement and like a prison cell. And they're only supposed to be there for 72 hours and then transferred to a shelter with the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Refugee Resettlement. During the height of the influx, children were held for up to 15 or even 20 days, way beyond the 72 hours required under federal law. After the children are transferred to the shelters, they may be there for 7 or 10 or 30 days before at least 90% of them will be reunified with families in the United States. Just because you're reunified does not mean that you have the right to remain in the United States. You get no permanent status. It is just the ability to go live with a family member or friend of a family member and go through the removal proceedings. During the time the children are in the shelters, they go to classes, they speak to counselors, they're able to contact family, have recreation, and they're provided legal services. And this is where the ABA project, ProBar, steps in, provides Know Your Rights presentations and individual screenings to all of these children. And the ones that show flags for relief are referred to programs like KIND and other programs throughout the country. As we mentioned already, there's no government-appointed counsel provided in these cases. Children are expected to find pro bono counsel, hire someone, or represent themselves. There is a lawsuit going on right now. American Immigration Council, the ACLU, Public Counsel, Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, and I think it's K&L Gates have filed a lawsuit against the government claiming that it's a violation of the Fifth Amendment due process clause to have children in removal proceedings without attorneys. That was filed in the Western District of Washington, and it was filed just about 2 months ago. And also, I just want to thank Violeta Discoa Salamanca, who's not here today, from ProBar for help in providing some of these slides relating to the conditions in Central America.